everybody for joining us tonight and making the time during a busy week. I'm really excited to be speaking with you about 5 questions you should consider before seeing an estate planner. Typically, I like to do these presentations in person so it can be a little more conversational, but we'll see how this medium works tonight. So far, so good. We'll certainly have some time tonight to answer any questions that you may have, and we're easy to get in touch with if you have questions later. Before we get started, I think it's important for me to introduce myself and let you know a little bit about how my life's journey has brought us together here tonight. I grew up in Westchester. In fact, I attended the Washington Street Elementary School for first grade before they closed it, and we were all sent over to Paley Pike Elementary School. Well, that's closed too. So I think that's making Pam a little bit nervous since I'm 0 for 2, and now I'm on the board of Westchester Friends School. Sorry about that, but we'll do our best. So I was kind of a precocious kid, not a great student, but I absolutely loved going to museums throughout the Brandywine Valley and Philadelphia with my maternal grandparents. These places opened up a world of learning to me that school just simply didn't. After college, I went to graduate school in New York City, working towards a doctorate in medieval philosophy. But after my master's degree, I got a little sidetracked. Tenure track positions were getting about 250 applicants for every job. And I knew about 240 of those applicants had better Latin skills than me, so I had to consider a plan B. As I reflected on what mattered most to me, I came to realize that I valued informal learning environments or museums more than formal learning environments like universities. In fact, the answer was right in front of my eyes all that time. I just simply didn't know it. So I left academia and started working at the Cloisters, the branch of the Metropolitan Museum of Art dedicated to the art and architecture of the Middle Ages. It was while working at the Met that I encountered Demuth's I saw the figure 5 in gold, the image that you see on the screen here, in person for the first time. But I had first seen that image as a poster in the art room of the Washington Street School in first grade. I left the Metropolitan to attend law school, not with the hopes of practicing law, but with the goal of returning to the nonprofit sector. So I focused on tax classes, and then I practiced law in a trust and estates firm for a year, and then I got right back into museums. As Pam said, today I'm the director of gift planning at the University of Pennsylvania, where I support the fundraising efforts of the schools of design and engineering, the Graduate School of Education, the nursing school, the vet school, and I work with the libraries and the museum. So this is a really long-winded story about me, but hopefully it gives you some sense about my values and where they came from, and why I think so much about making a difference in the lives of others through philanthropy. And it also explains why there's an art theme running through the presentation today. I'm having a little screen share moment. Is everyone able to see that? Are you able to see that?
Yep.
Okay. Are you still able to see that?
Yes, but now there are black bars on either side of it, and it's smaller. So
It's
I think
smaller.
what
Okay.
you had before was better for me, at least.
Okay. I may have to. Sorry, this is why I don't know that I'm going to be able to change that. Sorry about that. Is it too small? Are you unable to see it?
I can. There. Oh.
There? We good?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. So the first question I think one should consider before seeking any help in speaking with an estate planner is, what is really important to me and my family? It's simple, right? When you go to an estate attorney, a typical estate plan will consist of a will, a power of attorney, and a healthcare directive. For good or bad, many lawyers will assume your priorities are A, tax avoidance, and B, intergenerational wealth transfer. How can I get the most money down the line of consanguinity while avoiding as many taxes as possible? Are these your goals? Well, maybe, and that's okay. But the purpose of tonight's talk is to prepare you to articulate other goals. How will we build a peaceable kingdom like that envisioned by Edward Hicks? How can we further and perpetuate the things that we value the most? Do you and your family share the same values? Maybe these values are rooted in the testimonies, or maybe your family really values achievement or education or opportunity or equality or equity. It's important to have these conversations and know what these values are. The second question I invite you to consider is, what are our family's true assets? How can we further and perpetuate the things that we value the most with those assets, whatever they may be? And what are our tools, the kinds of tools that we may not think of as assets in the first place? For example, human capital. Who am I called to be? What am I called to do? What are my gifts and passions, talents, expertise, and dreams? What's my intellectual capital? What do I know and how do I know it? How do I learn and how do I make decisions? What is my social capital? What are the bonds and networks in our community and beyond our community? And finally, and last of all, what is my financial capital? What are my fungible assets and how do I steward my financial capital? Philanthropy doesn't happen in a vacuum. Most of us have other priorities too. And anyway, philanthropy starts at home. How do I guide and support the life journey of each family member over time? Maybe you've heard the expression, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Well, I think that's true in plotting out our goals for the future too. Think about the long-term impact of your goals and who can help bring your vision to fruition. Focus on the human, intellectual, and social capital of each family member. Stress the priority of each family member's individual gifts and leadings. Encourage open communication. This just doesn't happen enough in many families. We don't like to talk about money, and that means our families are often in the dark about important issues and important decisions. Determine what success looks like for you over the long term, not just your short-term goals. Tell and retell the family's most important stories. Stories are how we share what's important to us and how we shape the values of the rest of our family. And finally, give young family members as much responsibility as they can manage as soon as they can manage it. On the topic of families, what is an appropriate financial inheritance? Again, most people, Quaker or not, don't really like discussing money. So I'm going to tell a story about values and stuff. I was once working with a donor who shared with me that his son wanted a really nice car, like a really, really nice car, a Lamborghini. Now, I'm not a car guy, but I can imagine that for some people, this is a really important goal. But I asked, would he consider a Ferrari? After all, the cost difference, around $150,000, would allow the donor to name a gallery in the museum and thereby make art more accessible to the public, and his son would still get a pretty nice car. But cars were his thing. And while this donor supported the museum, museums weren't his highest priorities. Museums are my thing, not his. We didn't get that gift, and that's okay. We all have different priorities, and I'm not here to tell anyone what their priorities should be, and your advisors shouldn't either. Estate planners often ask, how much can we get to your children? But rarely ask, how much is right? There are timing considerations too about when assets should be transferred now, later, now and later. So when should you transfer a financial inheritance to your heirs? What form should a financial inheritance take? Will your heirs be responsible stewards? And how much freedom do you want to allow them to have? How much do you tell your heirs and when? I think it's important to teach the next generation the competencies and responsibilities of stewardship. And it's never too soon to start. And finally, the last of my 5 questions tonight, who is our community and what will it be? What is my place in it? So how can I further and perpetuate the things that I value the most? When can I start seeing the impacts of my philanthropy? And is that even important to me? What are my gifts and how can I use them most effectively? And who should be on my journey with me? My family, my friends, my advisors, and maybe the charities that mean the most to me. This is a painting the ideal city. So what is our ideal and what do we hope to build? These are the questions I think you should ask yourself before meeting with an estate planner. What is really important to me? And I want you to spend just a few moments thinking about that. What's important? What do I value the most? And I want you to think about your family's true assets in the multiple dimensions that we just discussed. Not just how much money do I have, what kind of human capital do I have? What kind of social capital do I have? Intellectual capital. And third, how do I guide and support the life journey of each family member over time? This really matters. Your philanthropy and the institutions that you support are a piece in a very complicated puzzle. Part of my kids' inheritance isn't just stuff, it's not just money, and it's certainly not a Lamborghini or Ferrari. Part of their inheritance is recognizing that I value certain institutions, and they're not losing their inheritance by virtue of my giving that support to charities. That is their inheritance. But we have to ask ourselves in practical terms, what's an appropriate financial inheritance? And are my kids responsible stewards for those resources? Do I want them to receive their inheritance outright or in a trust or through some other vehicle? And finally, who is our community and what will it be? And that just means so much to me. Being born here in Westchester, I struggled to get out of here. I couldn't wait to leave. And there's that old Dick Cavett line when he left television. And he had a row with the producers, and he came back after a year. His last line was, "There has to be a better way to make a living than this." And a year later, he came back and he said, "Well, I've looked around, and there's not." And that's sort of how I felt when I left Westchester. There has to be a better place in Westchester. And I've lived all over. I lived in Baltimore and New York and Ohio and all over. And I am so glad to be back in Westchester and be part of this community and making a difference in this community. So in closing my comments here, I'll just say estate planning can be really difficult. After all, it does require us at some level to contemplate our own mortality. But estate planning can also be joyful because we can focus on what matters the most to us, whatever that may be. And planning allows us to have some degree of control and peace of mind. What is the timing of my gift? What assets can I use to further the values that mean the most to me? What's the right giving vehicle? My will, a trust, some other blended giving strategy, maybe some now and some later? 40% of Americans die intestate. That is, they die without wills. And this doesn't mean that there's not a plan. There is a plan. Their estates are administered through the laws of intestacy. The plan is the state's plan. Is that the best plan? Is it meaningful? Is it your plan? Probably not. Now, I mentioned that I work at Penn, and every Penn talk is required to have one Benjamin Franklin quote, so here's mine for tonight. If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. If you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. So thanks for your time. And thanks, Pam, for inviting me to help spread the word about the importance of planning and hopefully philanthropy too. And now I'm as excited as everybody else to learn a little bit more about gift planning with Beth from the Chester County Community Foundation.
Thank you, Rob. That was a great presentation. I cannot promise you that I will have the same artwork. I will have artwork, but it's more familial, I'll say, than that. But what a wonderful way to kind of end the day is to kind of look at some really reflective pieces of art while we're considering, our legacy. So that to me was enough probably for the subject of this conversation. But let me share my screen and hopefully everybody can see it. And I'll start from the beginning. Okay, so so happy to hear everyone talk about Westchester as an asset. I have the benefit of having worked for the last 18 years, according to LinkedIn, because today apparently is my anniversary on LinkedIn, for the Chester County Community Foundation. And our goal is to work within Chester County, specifically for Chester County, to connect people who care with causes that matter, so their legacy makes a difference now and forever. So that's kind of our mission. But let me talk a little bit more about it. Oops. Let's see if I can do this. Beginning. All right. Let's see. Oh, there we go. So we were founded, the Community Foundation. First of all, Pam, thank you so much for inviting me to speak tonight. We are one of the partners that Westchester Friends School has, in that we hold a portion of their endowment fund, and Friends Fiduciary holds another portion of their endowment fund. So we're happy to be here tonight, but a lot of what I say is applicable not only to the Community Foundation and to your legacy giving in general through any charitable vehicle or to any nonprofit organization. So I'd like you to take my remarks in that context, I'll say. So the Community Foundation was founded about 25 years ago, actually 26 years ago, by a group of philanthropists who for the most part had their own family foundations. But their goal was to sort of create community philanthropy for the benefit of Chester County. So that Chester County and the nonprofits that make Chester County the rich community that it is will last forever. And so with that in mind, they thought, you know what? We'll encourage people that everyone can be a philanthropist, that they could leave charitable assets to the Community Foundation, and that they would still be able to advise on those assets during their lifetime. And then when they're no longer able to advise on those assets, their children could advise on their assets, or other friends or advisors that they have. And so the idea was that the Community Foundation would be comprised of endowment funds designed to last forever, whereby we can encourage legacy gifts and where we can encourage a sustainable flow of revenue to the nonprofits that mean so much to us in Chester County. So as a practical matter, the Community Foundation is a public charity. It's a 501c3, and we can gift money anywhere in the United States and sometimes even internationally. But as a practical matter, probably about 80% of the grants that are made from the Community Foundation actually go back to support Chester County-based nonprofits, true to the founders' philosophies. We're about 70 million in endowed assets right now. We have 400 plus endowed donor advised and nonprofit endowment funds, of which Westchester Friends is one of those nonprofit endowment funds. And each year we give out about 3.2 million in annual grants, and we've given out about 48 million since our inception as a philanthropic institution. I wanted to talk a little bit briefly about a donor advised fund and what it is, because that is what the Community Foundation is really based on. And in the last few years, although it's been around for quite a long time, in the last few years, the donor advised fund as a charitable vehicle of choice has really gotten a lot of prominence. In its simplest form, what a donor advised fund is, and some people call it a DAF, abbreviated donor advised fund, is that a donor, such as yourself, gives cash or other assets, and those other assets could be stock and real estate and things of that nature, to a charitable fund. That charitable fund, well, you get an immediate tax deduction for that gift, I should mention. The charitable fund that you give it to grows over time with investment earnings, and especially if it's an endowed fund, it is designed to last forever so that the corpus remains intact. And the donor, while they're living, gets to advise how to distribute those funds to charities of their choice. And that could be one charity, could be multiple charities. And what really is unique about a donor advised fund as a legacy planning tool is that you can instruct the holder of the donor advised fund, whether it's a community foundation such as Chester County, or whether it's Friends Fiduciary because they have a donor advised fund pool, or even commercial donor advised funds such as Vanguard, Fidelity, or Schwab, to sort of gift to various charities over after you're no longer able to. And so it's really a very flexible vehicle. It's very accessible. The Community Foundation, while we have a $25,000 minimum for establishing donor advised funds, some donor advised fund holders will start them at a lot less than that. So it's a very flexible charitable vehicle, which I wanted to mention. It's funny, when I was listening to Rob's presentation, I was thinking about, and especially his comment about wills and how many people actually die without having a will in place. And then I thought about what creates the opportunity or what creates the incentive for someone to put together their legacy plan. And many times it's when, they're making major business, personal, or financial decisions. There's a lot of research out there on this topic, and I'm a CPA by trade, so I tend to be a little bit analytic. But most people tend to make their first will upon three different events. One is when they get married. Two is really when they have their first child, I'd say is more prominent. And three is when they may have inherited a significant amount of money, or they have an asset that they'd like to sell, such as a business. And so there will be a significant asset. So when you think about making a will, thinking about your charitable legacy in the context of what Rob mentioned, those are sometimes when a lot of people that I see in my work as a philanthropic advisor tend to start to make these decisions. And there's a lot of opportunities. There's another statistic out there that has something to do with the fact that over the next 40 or so years, when the baby boomers begin to pass on, there will be a generational transfer wealth of about $50 trillion. Those numbers vary depending upon who you're talking to, but any way you look at it, it's a big number. So, and most people would say that the bulk of the assets are in real estate that people owned. So there's a variety of ways you can give to charity. Most of us are familiar with cash, and of course, stocks and securities. And don't we wish today that we'd all bought Zoom back before the pandemic, because we would see an increase in the assets. So stock generally makes for a very attractive gift. But real estate is becoming much more prominent. I know Rob's institution at Penn is a lot larger than the Community Foundation, but at the Community Foundation, we're beginning to see a significant amount of people asking us if we can do a gift of real estate, or if they can transfer a gift of real estate. And of course they can. Insurance makes a nice gift to charities. You can designate a charity as a beneficiary of an insurance policy, or other ways that you can work with insurance. Artwork. We have at the Community Foundation a fund which is based upon a particular artist's life. And we have people who have, in their testamentary estate plans, have offered to gift to us that artwork that is dedicated to that particular artist. So another form of giving. And of course, personal property. There's some tax rules around those kinds of things, but when you're thinking about gifts that you can utilize, there's a wide variety of things in your asset structure that would accommodate a charitable gift. By far, the most common type of charitable gift is a bequest, either a percentage of an estate or a fixed amount of funds within an estate, or the remainder of an estate. By far that is, and that's about 80% of all gifts to charities that come in the form of legacy or planned gifts are bequests. And so they're very easy. I think some people, when they're talking about legacy giving, get caught up in sort of the complexity. It's really not a very complex subject. It's actually very, very simple when you look at it that way. We'll talk a second about living trusts, although not too much because I know it's late, but I'll just touch on them briefly in the next slide. But one of the more, I would say, important gifts that one should consider are what I call beneficiary designations. It's odd that in this chart here, I did not mention beneficiary designations on retirement assets. I think I left that out by mistake, actually, because that's actually one of, I think, the most prominent gifts that are made to charity, or beneficiary designations on IRAs and other things like that. And part of the reason for that is because they transfer outside of an estate. They could be at a very attractive estate because of the fact that heirs tend to be taxed, and even more so under recent legislation on those assets. And so beneficiary designations of retirement plans make very important gifts to consider when you're thinking of giving a charitable legacy. Likewise, and I talked about life insurance or bank accounts or other kinds of property. Life income gifts are what we call split interest gifts, meaning that you as an individual are able to share in income during your lifetime, but at the end of your lifetime, in the case of a charitable gift annuity or in the case of a charitable remainder trust, the asset can pass to a charity. In terms of a lead trust, someone might sell a business and structure it so that the asset as a corpus will transfer to the next generation, but the nonprofit will receive lifetime income now. So there's a lot of different ideas that emerge when you're thinking about estate gifts and legacy gifts. And more often than not, you will be speaking to your financial advisors about these kinds of things. So we just wanted to provide sort of an overview. However, one of my most favorite topics is when you consider the lifelong longevity of any institution, whether it's Westchester Friends, whether it's the Friends Society in general, whether it's a local nonprofit that you like to support. I always tell people that the sustainability of that nonprofit is incumbent upon the gifts from individuals. I use this chart a lot. This is from 2018. I know it's updated for 2019. But if you think about how much money transfers hands between those who have and those who seek in the nonprofit world, it's about 428 billion based upon 2018 statistics. But what I find really intriguing about this chart is that 77% of all of the assets that transferred between those who have and the charities who seek came from individuals, either 68% in terms of what I'll call an active gift, cash, stock while someone's still living, or 9% in terms of bequest when they left a charity in their estate plan. And so when you think about the long-term survival of any nonprofit entity, it is really on the generosity of individuals such as yourself. So I'd like to bring this up because I think that's important to remember, that when you're thinking of a favorite institution that you support, how important the gift of the individual is to that institution. I know Rob briefly touched on something that I wanted to mention. To me, when you think about a legacy gift, I think it's the perfect intersection of your values as an individual or a human being during your lifetime with the values that you'd like to support and that you'd like to encourage for future generations. To me, that's sort of the pinnacle. That's sort of what makes a legacy gift important and what makes it fun too, because you can have your values outlive you, move on to the next generation, and sustain an institution forever. So to me, that's really why I like to show this chart and talk about just the importance of the individual. I think that any discussion on charitable vehicles would be remiss if I didn't talk about two different things. One is the qualified charitable distribution. If you're 70 and a half or older, you have the benefit of transferring tax-free up to $100,000 to a qualified charity directly from your IRA. And therefore, in those years when you're required to take a required minimum distribution, and of course this year you're not required to take your required minimum distribution under the CARES Act, but in those years when you are, one of the most popular gifts to charities is the qualified charitable deduction. And again, it must go directly from your IRA holder to the charity, but it's a great gift and it's a wonderful gift that one can make. So I like to mention that because I think that's something that everyone consider as a charitable gift. This may be a little bit hard to read. I know I sent Pam the slides and she can send them out to each of you. But this year, there's a couple changes that you should be aware of. There's what we call the universal deduction has been enacted. It's fairly small. It's only $300 per actual. It says per individual. It's actually per unit filing their tax return. So if you're filing jointly, it's $300 for both of you filed jointly. That's one thing that's above the line, so you don't need to itemize. So that's a good thing. We're hoping to see that number increase in future years so that it's more than 300. I know that the charitable organizations have a lot of lobbyists who are working on that particular issue, but it's a gift. And the other thing is that when you're giving to charity this year, again, individuals were provided incentives to give to charity so that they could make contributions up to 100% of their adjusted gross income, which is generally about 60% that they can make. So I wanted to mention that because I think those are important tax considerations this year, not necessarily legacy considerations, but they're important to consider as you look at your plan. You know what? It's funny, and I'm touched by what Rob said about the different types of capital one has and the values that are important and how you transfer that between generations. I've been fortunate in my career to work with many donors, and it's been a lot of fun. So I picked four faces here tonight. One, and I love the one with the birthday cake. That's you can have your cake and eat it too. That's an individual who has a charitable gift annuity. So they're getting lifetime income during their life, but they're also giving to the charity that they want to support. The woman at the top represents what I'm going to call someone who's really contemplated their life's gifts to various different charities and has decided in her estate plan to give back to those various charities. That's very common in my world, and I enjoy so much working with those individuals. The individual on the right is a gentleman named Everett Frank. He was one of my mentors at the college that I went to school at. When he passed away, unfortunately, a couple of years ago, my colleagues and I set up a fund in his honor at another community foundation. Actually, I wasn't working for the Chester County Community Foundation at that time, so we set it up at another one. And the picture on the bottom represents, something that I know Rob touched on in terms of intergenerational values. I love speaking to our donors and donors in general about what their values are and how they would like to involve the next generation and their family members in their charitable planning. So we always say the results of philanthropy are always beyond calculation. That doesn't mean that there may not be tax advantages to your charitable giving, but by far, tax advantages do not drive a charitable legacy. By far, it's just what we call the icing on the cake. So in summary, and this kind of incorporates Rob's presentation to a little bit, think about, the values, those 5 questions. I'm going to go back and look at the artwork myself because I'd like to spend a little bit more time looking at the artwork. But I also thinking about the various different assets that you have, whether they're financial, human, intellectual capital, social capital, that those assets and what you would like to do in terms of your legacy planning are so important. Use resources where appropriate. I think one of the reasons why Rob and I wanted to speak tonight is because we wanted you to be aware of some of the options that might be available before you talk to a financial advisor, so that you're as prepared as they are to kind of bring up the charitable discussion. The sad thing is that a very small percentage of professional advisors actually ask you the charitable question. Again, there's some kind of a survey out there that says that less than 2% ask that kind of a question. So it's important for you to bring it up when you're meeting with your advisors because they might not think to bring it up. But if you do bring it up, then they can help you accomplish your goals, which is great. They will help you look at maximizing your gift effectiveness. What makes sense? Does it make sense to give, say, appreciated stock? Does it make sense to designate a charity on your IRA? Does it make sense to designate a life insurance policy? I have found that some people like to involve their families and others do not. So if you're a person who loves to involve or thinks your family should be involved in your estate planning or understanding your charitable interest, I encourage you to do that while you're still able to do that. Plan your gift with the charity. Bequests are revocable, and some people are hesitant to talk with the charity about those bequests. But if it's a charity that you think you would like to support long term, then I would suggest that you do talk about the charity in terms of the use of the gift. Now, I'm going to have to bring up a Ben Franklin quote too. Actually, it's not a quote, it's just a thought process. At the Community Foundation, we have what's called the Ben Franklin Legacy Society. Many nonprofits have legacy societies where they recognize people who have gifted to that particular nonprofit during their lifetime or in an estate gift that they planned during their lifetime. In our case, we have the Ben Franklin Legacy Society. And the reason we have the Ben Franklin Legacy Society is that when Ben passed away, he left a percentage of his estate to the state of Pennsylvania and a percentage of his estate to the city of Boston. For whatever reason, Pennsylvania's did not gain much in interest over the years, and Boston's kind of escalated, but that's beyond my comprehension level here tonight. But about 20 years ago, when the Community Foundation was very, very small, a percentage of the Ben Franklin Legacy Gift was given to each of the community foundations in Pennsylvania. So each year, with the help of Westchester University Civics Honors Class, we give out at least a $1,000 grant in Ben's honor to causes that he would have supported. That's just a wonderful story and a great legacy. So if you think about that, the extension is wonderful. And last but not least, implement your plan. So I want to thank Pam and Rob tonight for inviting me to speak with you. As you can tell, this is one of my favorite subjects to talk about. We are available to speak to you at any point in time, but I'm also willing to answer any questions that anyone has right now as well. But thank you so much for inviting me to talk to your group tonight, Pam and Rob.